I was kidnapped. The kidnappers called my husband, who was at that moment intimately entwined with his true love. Your wife is in our hands, bring 10 million to exchange for her. On the other end of the line, my husband's voice was cold and indifferent. She's not worth that price, go ahead and kill her. In despair, I closed my eyes. However, the kidnappers suddenly untied my ropes and respectfully handed me a cup of hot tea. Miss, the chairman has instructed that if the son-in-law dares to say no, he should be dealt with on the spot, and the company will be inherited by you. Holding the cup of hot tea, my hands were still trembling slightly. My dad? Yes, the burly man nodded obsequiously. The chairman said this is called a stress test. Suddenly, I found it somewhat amusing. My father, the chairman of the Linson Group, is a businessman who never believes in tears but only in interests and human nature. With a meticulously planned kidnapping, he tore apart the facade of affectionate harmony in my 3-year marriage. As for Sean, he didn't even pass this simplest test. What does deal with mean? I asked. The burly man made a throat-slitting gesture, his eyes fierce, physical elimination in the literal sense. The chairman said that such an ungrateful wretch would only be a scourge if kept alive. I shook my head, no need, leave him to me. I wanted to watch him personally lose everything he had so eagerly pursued. The burly man, who was my father's security captain Mark, personally drove me home. It was a riverside villa in the prime downtown area, our marital home with Sean, and the property deed bore only my name. The car stopped at the door, but I didn't get out immediately. Mark looked at me through the rearview mirror. Miss, if there's anything, just instruct me. Brother Mark, I began, besides you and me, who else knows about today's events? Only a few absolutely reliable brothers. I'll report personally to the chairman. Good, I nodded, treat today's events as if they never happened. Afterward, I might still need to trouble you all. Miss, you're too kind, serving you is my honor. I pushed open the door and got out, using my fingerprint to unlock the house door. The living room was brightly lit. My husband Sean was embracing a woman on the sofa. That woman was my own sister, Yvette. Yvette was wearing my silk nightgown, her long hair disheveled, her small face tear-streaked like pear blossoms in the rain. Sean was holding her, softly comforting. Don't be afraid, Yvette, I'm here. The air was filled with the scent of their intimacy, a decadent familiarity I had never sensed from them before. The silk nightgown on Yvette was my favorite one, now like a glaring mockery, tightly wrapping her smugness. Seeing me enter, the two jumped apart like cats whose tails had been stepped on. A flash of panic crossed Sean's face, but he quickly composed himself. He stood up, walked over to me, his tone carrying a hint of reproach. Where have you been? Your phone wasn't connecting. I looked at him, this man who just moments ago wanted me dead, now playing the role of an anxious husband. It was truly ridiculous. I had some business and went out for a bit, I said flatly. Yvette also came over, timidly grabbing my arm, her eyes red-rimmed. Sister, don't blame brother Sean, he was just too worried about you. You weren't answering the phone, and we were nearly frantic. She was always like this, with a fragile and pitiable appearance. Even the gravest mistakes, when spoken from her mouth, became excusable. It had been this way from childhood to adulthood. If she broke Mom's favorite vase, she would cry and say, Sister pushed me a little, I didn't mean to. If she lost Dad's important documents, she would sob, Sister asked me to get her homework book, and I accidentally dropped them. And my parents would always point at my nose and scold, You're the older sister, can't you yield a bit to your younger sister? I brushed off her hand, my gaze falling on Sean. Is that so? You were very worried about me? Of course, Sean frowned, you left without saying where you were going. Do you know how worried I was? Then why did you tell the kidnappers to kill me just now? My voice wasn't loud, but it exploded like a thunderbolt in the living room. Sean's face instantly turned ashen. What are you saying? Sean's voice trembled, what kidnappers? What killing? Yvette also widened her eyes, looking innocent. Sister, did you see wrong? Brother Sean has been with me the whole time. I laughed. I walked up to them, took out my phone from my bag, and pressed play. It was the recording I had Mark secretly make. Your wife is in our hands, bring 10 million to exchange. She's not worth that price, go ahead and kill her. Sean's cold and heartless voice clearly echoed in every corner of the living room. His face turned from pale to deathly gray. Yvette was also stunned, her mouth agape, unable to say a word. Now, do you want me to repeat it? I looked at Sean. He opened his mouth, seeming to want to explain, but couldn't utter a single word. The recording was ironclad evidence. Lynn, listen to my explanation. He finally found his voice and took a step toward me. I stepped back, avoiding his outstretched hand. Don't touch me. His hand froze in midair, his face showing a hurt expression. I thought it was a scam call, you know, there are many such frauds nowadays. Oh? I raised an eyebrow, would a scam call tell you to die? That's not what I meant. He urgently explained, I panicked for a moment and spoke without thinking. Panicked? I looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Sean, we've been married for 3 years, in your heart, am I only worth a slip of the tongue? No, Lynn, believe me, I love you. In his urgency, he tried to hug me. But Yvette suddenly screamed, clutching her stomach and collapsing to the ground. Ah! My stomach, it hurts so much. Sean was immediately drawn to Yvette's scream. He rushed to her side, picked her up horizontally, his face showing an anxiety and panic I had never seen before. Yvette. What's wrong? Don't scare me. Brother Sean, my stomach hurts so much, our child. Yvette cried breathlessly in his arms, her small face wrinkled in apparent extreme pain. Child? My mind buzzed. 2 years of bitter traditional medicine, the disappointment after each pregnancy check, his gentle comfort, it's okay, Lynn, we're not in a hurry, I love you, it has nothing to do with children. Those lies that once warmed me immensely now felt like cold knives, slowly torturing my heart. Sean, holding Yvette, rushed past me like a gust of wind. Lynn. If anything happens to Yvette, I'll never forgive you. He roared this at me and disappeared through the door without looking back. I stood alone in the spacious living room, my hands and feet ice cold. So, they not only betrayed me but also had a child. And I, the fool kept in the dark, had drunk 2 years of bitter and astringent traditional medicine to conceive his child. Every pregnancy check, he accompanied me. Every time the doctor announced the results, he would hold me and gently comfort, it's okay, Lynn, we're not in a hurry, I love you, it has nothing to do with children. Now thinking back, that gentleness was nothing but meticulously woven lies. Those check reports had probably been tampered with by him long ago. My phone vibrated, it was a message from Mark. Miss, we found out, Yvette has a file at Renai Hospital's obstetrics and gynecology department, she's 8 weeks pregnant. Renai Hospital was exactly where I had my pregnancy checks each time. And Sean's university classmate was the director of obstetrics and gynecology there. Everything connected. I slowly walked to the sofa and sat down. Once, I thought this was my haven, now, it seemed nothing but a luxurious cage. I picked up my phone and dialed my dad's number. Dad, it's me. On the other end, my dad's steady voice came, figured it out? Yes, I said, I want a divorce. Also, I want 30% of the Linson Group's shares. This was what my mom left me, but when I got married, my dad transferred it to Sean under the pretext of training Sean, as his entry ticket to the core management of Linson. Alright, my dad agreed readily, I'll have the lawyers handle it tomorrow. Lynn, wait a moment. On the other end, my dad's voice carried a hint of coldness, I'll have Mark send you the financial secret reports on Sean and Yvette over these years, as well as evidence of their conspiracy, to your email immediately. One more thing, I paused, neither Sean nor Yvette should get away easily. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Yvette is your sister too. When she didn't treat me as her sister, I no longer had this sister. My dad sighed, do as you wish. After hanging up, I looked at the dark river surface outside the window, my heart calm. This battle had just begun. The next day, I didn't go to the company. My dad's legal team was highly efficient. By morning, they had drafted the divorce agreement and equity transfer agreement and delivered them to the villa. I signed them, placed the agreements on the coffee table, and waited for Sean to return. He didn't return until noon, looking exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. Seeing me sitting on the sofa, he paused, then walked over, his tone much softer. "Lynn, are you still angry? Last night was my fault, I was too anxious." "How is Yvette?" I asked, my tone as calm as asking about the weather today. He paused and said, "Nothing serious, the doctor said it was just fetal distress and she needs bed rest." "That's good." He seemed unprepared for my calmness, somewhat at a loss. "Lynn, I know I was wrong, I shouldn't have yelled at you. But Yvette, she is pregnant with my child after all, I can't ignore her." He spoke righteously, as if I were the one who cheated. I looked at him and suddenly found it very amusing. "Sean, let's divorce." I pushed the agreement on the coffee table toward him. Seeing the words, divorce agreement, his face changed again. "I won't divorce." He refused without thinking. "Lynn, I love you, I can't live without you." Yvette and I were just momentarily confused. "I swear, I'll cut ties with her completely." "Cut ties completely?" I countered, "What about the child in her belly?" He choked. "I'll give her some money, have her abort the child, send her abroad, and she'll never appear before us again in this lifetime." He said urgently, as if making an incredibly difficult decision. Looking at his hypocritical face, I felt only disgust. "No need," I said, "you leave with nothing, I'll let you and her live happily together." "Leave with nothing?" He laughed as if hearing the biggest joke. "Lynn, don't forget, the company now has 30% of shares under my name. On what grounds do you make me leave with nothing?" "On this." I took out my phone again and played another recording. It was my conversation with Mark. "The chairman has instructed that if the son-in-law dares to say no, deal with him on the spot." Sean's face completely lost color. He slumped on the sofa, looking at me as if seeing a devil. You and your dad conspired to scheme against me? It was you who couldn't withstand the scheme." I stood up, looking down at him from above. "Sean, sign it. Otherwise, I don't know what my dad will do." Sean looked at me, his eyes filled with fear, unwillingness, and a hint of malice. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking badly, and signed his name on the agreement. He also signed the equity transfer agreement. After signing, he slammed the pen on the table, looking as if all his vitality had been drained. "Lynn, you're really ruthless." "Not as ruthless as you," I said flatly, "you're the one who wanted me dead." He had no rebuttal. "Now, you can get out." I issued the eviction order. He stood up, staggering toward the door. At the door, he suddenly turned back, looking at me. "You'll regret this." I ignored him. After he left, I called Mark. "Brother Mark, send someone to follow him and see where he goes." Half an hour later, Mark called back. "Miss, he went to Renai Hospital." As expected. He still couldn't let go of his precious darling and that child. I changed clothes and drove to Renai Hospital. When I arrived, Sean and Yvette were arguing in the ward. The ward door wasn't fully closed. Standing at the door, I could clearly hear the conversation inside. "What did you say? Divorce? Leave with nothing?" Yvette's voice was sharp and shrill. "Sean, are you crazy? You forgot our original plan? What choice do I have?" Sean's voice was full of irritation. "Lynn's dad somehow found out about us and set a trap for me. If I don't sign, I won't even keep my life." "Then what about our child? Our company? The money we invested?" Yvette cried out, "That's all our savings." "Keep your voice down." Sean lowered his voice. "The most important thing now is to stabilize Lynn. Once the heat dies down, I'll find a way to get the shares back." "Get them back?" Easier said than done. Yvette sneered, do you think Lynn is still the fool you could manipulate before? She's clearly out to ruin us. Then what do you suggest? A crisp slap sounded from the ward. It must have been Yvette slapping Sean. Useless thing. Yvette cursed, if it weren't for your bit of brains to help me get Lynn's shares, I wouldn't be with a social climber like you. Yvette, don't go too far. Me going too far? Sean, get it straight, now you're the one with nothing. What do you have to act tough with me? Standing at the door, listening to this dog-eat-dog drama, my heart had no ripples. I pushed the door open and walked in. Seeing me, the argument in the ward abruptly stopped. Yvette lay on the bed, tears still on her cheeks. Seeing me, a flash of panic crossed her eyes. Sean, covering his face, looked embarrassed and awkward upon seeing me. Continue. I pulled a chair and sat down, leisurely looking at them. Don't let me affect your emotional exchange. Yvette bit her lip, saying nothing. Sean's face alternated between pale and flushed. Lynn, what are you doing here? He asked. I'm here to see my dear sister. I emphasized dear heavily, and by the way, hear about your grand plans. You heard everything? Yvette asked, her voice trembling. Not entirely, I shook my head. Why not tell me from the beginning? For example, when did you start? And for example, what's the deal with your company? Both were silent. Not saying? No problem, I smiled. I have plenty of time to investigate slowly. I stood up and walked to Yvette's bedside. She subconsciously shrank back. Don't be afraid, I leaned down and whispered in her ear, I won't do anything to you. After all, the child in your belly is the Shin family's flesh and blood. I straightened up and looked at Sean. Take good care of her, after all, she's your only hope now. With that, I turned and left. Leaving the ward, I immediately called Mark. Brother Mark, help me investigate a company that Sean and Yvette jointly opened. It should be registered recently. Brother Mark, contact the media immediately. I want Sean and Yvette's scandal known to everyone within 24 hours. After hanging up, I walked out of the hospital. The sunlight outside was somewhat dazzling. I squinted, drove straight to the company. From today, the Linson Group would be under my control. I returned to the company and went straight to the chairman's office. My dad was practicing Tai Chi in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Seeing me enter, he slowly finished. All handled? Yes, I nodded. The divorce and equity transfer agreements are signed. That kid Sean didn't make a fuss? He wouldn't dare. My dad smiled, poured me a cup of tea. I knew he was all show and no substance. Dad, I looked at him, you knew about him and Yvette long ago? My dad sighed, neither admitting nor denying. Lynn, you're my daughter, I won't harm you. Someone like Sean has too much ambition but not enough ability. Keeping him by your side would eventually be a disaster. Then why didn't you tell me earlier? If I told you, would you believe me? He countered. Back then, to marry him, you almost severed ties with me. I fell silent. Yes, back then, I was blinded by love, plunging headfirst into the gentle trap Sean wove, listening to no one. What about Yvette? How do you plan to handle her? I asked. She's your sister. My dad repeated this. When she harmed me, she didn't think of me as her sister. My tone cooled. Dad, don't interfere in this, I'll handle it myself. My dad looked at me, his expression complex. After a long while, he nodded. You've grown up. Leaving the chairman's office, I directly convened all the executives for an emergency meeting. In the meeting, I announced two things. First, I have divorced Sean, and all Linson Group shares under his name have been transferred back to me. Second, effective immediately, I will officially take over as president of Linson Group, fully responsible for the company's operations and management. As soon as the news was out, the conference room erupted in murmurs. These executives were mostly old veterans who had built the empire with my dad. Naturally, they had doubts about me, this parachuted miss. Especially the vice president, Jason, my second uncle's cousin, who had always eyed the president's position covetously. President Lin, he said with a forced smile, you've just taken over the company and aren't familiar with the business yet. Can you handle such a heavy burden alone? Whether I can handle it isn't up to you, Vice President Jason. I looked at him, neither humble nor arrogant. The company isn't mine alone, there are all of you here. I believe with everyone's assistance, Linson will only get better. I paused, then shifted tone. Of course, if anyone thinks I'm incapable or has ulterior motives, they can resign now. I won't retain them. Linson doesn't support idlers, let alone traitors. My gaze swept over everyone present. The conference room was silent as a pin drop. Jason's face looked somewhat ugly. I knew this was just the beginning. To firmly establish myself in Linson, I must demonstrate real capability. After the meeting adjourned, Mark called. Miss, we've found it. The company is called Yadong Technology, registered half a year ago. The legal representative is Yvette, but the actual controller is Sean. The company address is in the office building opposite ours. What about the business scope? It highly overlaps with our company's ongoing bid for the West City Smart City project. I understood. Sean and Yvette had planned this long ago, to hollow out Linson and start anew. The West City Smart City project was Linson's top priority for the second half of the year, with massive investments in manpower and resources. If this project was snatched away, it would be a fatal blow to Lin's senior brother Mark. Help me with a few things. I lowered my voice and instructed over the phone. After hanging up, I looked at the office building opposite where Yadong Technology was located, and I had a plan in mind. Sean, Yvette, your game is over. The next day, I went to work as usual. Just arriving at the office, the assistant knocked and entered, looking panicked. President Lin, bad news, our core technical plan for the West City project has been leaked. Leaked? I feigned surprise. How? This morning, the bidding competitor Yadong Technology published their plan on their official website, and it's identical to ours. I opened my computer and clicked on Yadong Technology's official website. Indeed, their plan, from technical architecture to implementation details, was almost a pixel-level copy. And their publication time was 2 hours earlier than ours. This meant that to the outside world, it appeared Linson had plagiarized them. The office phones were soon overwhelmed. Partners, media, shareholders, everyone called to question. Internally, the company was in turmoil. Jason was the first to burst into my office, slamming a newspaper on my desk. Lin, look at what you've done. In just a few days, you've turned the company into a mess. What face do you have to sit in this position? The newspaper's front page headline was in bold black letters, Linson Group embroiled in plagiarism scandal, century-old reputation destroyed overnight? I picked up the newspaper, glanced at it, and threw it back on the desk. Vice President Jason, why so agitated? The matter hasn't been investigated yet, and you've already convicted me? What's there to investigate? The evidence is conclusive. Jason pointed at the computer screen, their plan is already published. Now the whole industry is laughing at Linson. Is that so? I smiled, then why not make the joke even bigger? I immediately contacted my father, asking him to use his connections to have the police simultaneously investigate Sean for commercial espionage. Before the press conference, all evidence would be ready. I had the assistant convene a press conference. As soon as the news was out, the whole company exploded. President Lin, are you crazy? Holding a press conference now isn't offering your face to be slapped? Yes, President Lin, think twice. We should first conduct an internal audit and find the mole. Jason was even more furious, jumping in anger. Lin, you're going to destroy Linson. Ignoring them, I headed straight to the conference room. The press conference site was already packed with media from all sides. Flashlights flickered incessantly, almost blinding. I walked to the front, sat down. The reporters opposite, like sharks smelling blood, vied to ask questions. President Lin, what explanation does your company have for plagiarizing Yadong Technology's plan? As the industry leader, why would Linson Group do such a despicable thing? Is the mole who leaked the plan the already departed Mr. Sean? Does this relate to your marital breakdown? The questions were sharper than the last. I raised my hand, signaling silence. Everyone, I began, my voice clearly transmitted through the microphone to every corner. I invited you here today to clarify one thing. Our Linson group did not plagiarize. The audience erupted. So President Lin means Yadong Technology plagiarized you? A reporter asked loudly. You could say that. What evidence do you have? As far as we know, Yadong Technology published earlier than you. Of course I have evidence. I pressed the clicker in my hand. A document appeared on the big screen behind me. This is the patent certificate our Linson group applied for 3 months ago for the core technical plan of the West City project. Patent number, application date, Lin clearly. While Yadong Technology has been established for only half a year. I ask, how could a company established for half a year independently develop technology we patented 3 months ago? The audience was silent. All reporters widened their eyes, looking at the patent certificate on the big screen with disbelief. I continued, as for how Yadong Technology obtained our plan, I think we need to ask its actual controller, Mr. Sean. Mr. Sean, as my ex-husband and former executive of Linson Group, used his position to steal company trade secrets, conspiring with his lover Miss Yvette, who is my own sister, intending to harm Linson's interests. We have solid evidence of this and have reported to the police. I pressed the clicker again. The big screen started playing a video. It was the scene of Sean and Yvette arguing in the ward. You forgot our original plan? Once the heat dies down, I'll find a way to get the shares back. If it weren't for your brains to help me get Linson's shares, I wouldn't be with a social climber like you. Every word was crystal clear. The scene exploded. Business warfare, marital change, sibling enmity, mistress, each element was enough to ignite public opinion. I looked at the flashing lights below, my heart ice cold. Sean, Yvette, this is just the beginning. The press conference's effect was immediate. Public opinion reversed instantly. Linson Group went from plagiarizer to victim. Yadong Technology's website was crashed by angry netizens. The company's stock price plummeted, evaporating nearly 30% in one day. Sean and Yvette became public enemies, reviled by all. The police quickly intervened, taking Sean away on suspicion of trade secret theft. Yvette, being pregnant, was placed under surveillance residence. My mom called me crying, cursing me over the phone. Lin. Do you have any conscience? She's your own sister. How can you treat her like this? Mom, I interrupted, when she and Sean plotted against me, did she think of me as her sister? She was just momentarily confused. Deceived by that bastard Sean. Why can't you forgive her once? Forgive? I laughed. Mom, do you know that when Sean told the kidnappers to kill me, Yvette was right beside him? Do you know that the child in her belly was conceived while I was drinking 2 years of traditional medicine to get pregnant? Do you know that the money they used to start the company was what I gave Sean to honor you? With each sentence I said, my mom's breathing grew more rapid. Enough. Stop. She screamed to interrupt me, no matter what, you can't drive her to death. She still has a child in her belly. The child is Sean's, not mine. Her path is her own choice, no one else to blame. Lin. How did I give birth to such a cold-blooded, heartless daughter? She hung up after saying that. Holding the phone, listening to the busy tone, my heart had no waves. Cold-blooded and heartless? It was they who forced me to this point step by step. In the afternoon, Jason knocked and entered my office. His face no longer had the previous arrogance, instead, it was a complex expression. President Lin, He stammered for a while, before, I was blind to your abilities, don't take it to heart. Vice President Jason, you're too serious, I looked up at him, we're all for the good of the company. Yes, he nodded repeatedly, this move of yours is really brilliant. Not only clearing the company's suspicion but also annihilating the opponent in one stroke. Brilliant. Truly brilliant. I smiled, non-committal. For the West City project next, I'll have to trouble Vice President Jason to put in more effort. Rest assured. I'll devote myself fully, even unto death. After sending Jason away, I leaned back in the chair, somewhat tired. This battle seemed won, but I knew it wasn't over. As long as Yvette and my mom were around, this farce wouldn't end easily. Sure enough, a few days later, my mom brought Yvette storming into the company. At that time, I was in an important project meeting. My mom pushed open the conference room door directly and rushed in, followed by Yvette wrapped tightly with mask and sunglasses. "Lynn! Get out here!" My mom stood with hands on hips, like a shrew cursing in the street, completely lacking her usual ladylike elegance. Everyone in the conference room stopped, looking at this sudden scene. I frowned. "Mom, I'm in a meeting, whatever it is, wait until after the meeting." "I can't wait." She rushed to me, pointing at my nose. "You must come with me to the hospital today and bring your sister home." "Home?" I countered. "Which home? Yours or mine?" "Of course our home. My home doesn't welcome mistresses and their bastards." My words were like a resounding slap on my mom's face. She trembled with anger, raising her hand to hit me. I didn't dodge. But her hand was caught by my dad. My dad, who had arrived unnoticed, stood behind her with a grim face. "Have you caused enough trouble?" he growled lowly. "Isn't it embarrassing enough?" "George. You still know embarrassment?" My mom shook off his hand, pointing at me. "Look at the fine daughter you've raised. Denying all kin. Driving her own sister to death. She brought it on herself." My dad retorted unpolitely. "You." My mom was choked with anger. Yvette stood aside, trembling in fear upon seeing my dad. She took off her sunglasses, revealing a pitifully crying small face. "Dad, sister, I know I was wrong, please forgive me. I won't dare again." Saying this, she was about to kneel to me. I sidestepped. "Don't," I said, "I can't accept it." "Sister," she grabbed my hem, crying harder, "for the child's sake, spare me this time. He's still so young, can't be without a father. The child without a father is your and Sean's responsibility, not mine." I coldly brushed off her hand. "Yvette, put away this hypocritical act, it disgusts me." "Lynn!" My mom screamed again. "How can you talk to your sister like that?" "Then how should I say it?" I looked at her. Congratulate her on being pregnant with my ex-husband's child? Wish them 100 years of harmony and early birth of a noble son? You're simply unreasonable. The unreasonable ones are you. I finally couldn't endure any more. One treats her daughter as a tool to seize family property, the other treats her sister as a stepping stone to climb up. You mother and daughter are a perfect match. My dad's face grew increasingly ugly. He signaled the bodyguards behind him. 2 bodyguards immediately stepped forward, one on each side, restraining my mom and Yvette. "Take them away." My dad's voice had no warmth. "From now on, without my permission, they are not allowed to step into the company." "George! You dare!" My mom struggled, shouting loudly. Yvette was also terrified, her face pale, crying, "Dad! No! Dad!" But no one paid attention. They were soon taken away from the conference room. The farce finally ended. The conference room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone looked at me, their eyes containing sympathy, awe, and schadenfreude. I took a deep breath and sat back in my position. Let's continue the meeting. After driving that mother-daughter pair out of the company, life became much quieter. The West City project, without competitors, was smoothly secured. The company's operations gradually got on track. My prestige in the company also steadily solidified. Sean's case soon went to trial. Trade secret theft, plus the evidence I had Mark collect of him previously using his position to accept kickbacks and embezzle public funds. With multiple crimes, he was sentenced to 10 years. I didn't go on the day of the verdict. It was Mark who told me the result. He said Sean kept looking at the gallery in court, as if searching for someone. But none of the people he was looking for went. I didn't go, my dad didn't go, my mom and Yvette didn't go either. He was betrayed by all, utterly defeated. This was exactly the result I wanted. On Yvette's side, as an accomplice and in lactation period, she received a suspended sentence. She moved out of that villa and lived back in the Lynn family old house with my mom. I heard she gave birth to the child, a boy. My mom was very happy, holding her grandson all day, showing off everywhere. As if that child could wash away all of Yvette's stains. They tried to contact me several times, essentially wanting me to help them for the child's sake. I ignored them every time. My dad turned a blind eye to this. He no longer managed that mother-daughter pair but tacitly allowed them to live in the old house. I knew that in his heart, he still cared for that thin thread of family affection. I didn't care. I put all my energy into work. Under my leadership, Lynn Sen's performance soared, expanding several new business areas. I became known in the business world as the Iron Lady, decisive and resolute. No one dared call me Miss anymore, everyone respectfully addressed me as President Lynn. I thought days would pass peacefully like this. Until that day, I received an unexpected call. It was from Sean's mother, my former mother-in-law. "Lynn, it's Mom." On the other end came an aged and humble voice. I was stunned for a moment before realizing who it was. In 3 years of marriage to Sean, I had only seen this mother-in-law once at the wedding. She was a typical rural woman, timid and reticent. Sean said she was in poor health and not accustomed to big city life, so he kept her in the hometown. Every month, I would have Sean send her living expenses. There was almost no interaction between us. "Is there something?" My tone was polite but distant. "Lynn, Mom knows Sean wronged you, he's worthless, he got his retribution, he deserves it." She started crying, but Mom begs you, for the sake of our mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship, go see him, okay? He's not going to make it. I frowned. What's wrong with him? He has cancer, late stage. She cried breathlessly, the doctor said it's just these few days, he wants to see you one last time. I was silent. Honestly, I had no feelings left for Sean. Love or hate, all dissipated with that lawsuit. Whether he lived or died now had nothing to do with me. "Lynn, Mom begs you." On the other end, she continued pleading bitterly, "Just pity this old woman, okay? I have only this one son." I felt somewhat irritated. But in the end, I inexplicably agreed. "Send me the address." After hanging up, I had the driver take me to the address she sent. It was a small hospital in the suburbs. In the ward, I saw Sean. He lay on the bed, emaciated and withered, thin to just skin and bones. If not for that vaguely recognizable face, I almost couldn't recognize this as the once spirited man. Seeing me, a spark lit in his cloudy eyes. He struggled to sit up but didn't even have the strength to lift his hand. His mother, that thin old woman, quickly came forward to support him. "Lynn, you're here." His voice was hoarse like a broken bellows. I stood at the door, not approaching. "You called for me, what's the matter?" He looked at me, suddenly laughed, a laugh uglier than crying. "I just wanted to see you one more time." Cough cough. He coughed violently, almost coughing out his lungs. His mother patted his back while shedding tears. Watching this scene, I felt nothing in my heart. "You've seen me," I said, "I'm leaving." I turned to go. "Wait." He urgently called me back, "Yvette." "Yvette she. What's wrong with her?" "She sold the child." My steps halted. "What did you say?" "She thought the child was a burden, so she sold the child, to traffickers." Sean gasped, speaking intermittently, "She took that money, and ran off with a pretty boy." I turned back, looking at him. His eyes were filled with despair and malice. "Yvette that bitch. She's not human. For that pretty boy, she not only sold our child but also injured my mom." Cough cough. How was I blind back then to get involved with such a venomous woman? She'll get her retribution. She definitely will. He coughed violently again, each cough like tearing pain from his lungs. My mom went to find her, got beaten by her. My mom is so old, how could she do it? Lynn. He looked at me, his eyes carrying a plea. I know. I don't deserve to beg you, but, that child, he's your nephew too. Please, help me, find him back. After saying this, he had another heart-wrenching cough. Looking at him, I suddenly felt this was the most ironic thing in the world. A woman who, for so-called love, abandoned husband and child to elope. A man who, for so-called prospects, betrayed his wife and stole family assets. Back then, they professed it was all for that child. Now, that child had become garbage they could discard at will. Lynn, consider me begging you. He was still pleading. I looked at him and shook my head. Sean, even now, you don't understand? That child, from the moment of birth, was destined to be a tragedy. And the ones who caused this tragedy are none other than you and Yvette. You personally ruined your own lives and also ruined that child's life. Now, you want me to clean up your mess? On what grounds? After saying this, I no longer looked at him and turned to leave. Behind me came his mother's shrill cries. I didn't look back. Walking out of the hospital, the sunlight was brilliant. Yet I felt a huge shadow enveloping my heart, lingering. I called Mark. Brother Mark, help me investigate one thing. Mark was highly efficient. 3 days later, he placed the investigation results on my desk. Yvette had indeed sold the child. Sold to an underground organization specializing in illegal transactions. She took that money and went abroad with a small-time thug she met at a bar. My mom went to reason with her, got severely beaten by that thug, and is still in the hospital. When my dad found out, he was so angry he smashed everything smashable in the old house on the spot. He used all his connections to freeze Yvette's accounts abroad. That thug, seeing she had no money, quickly dumped her. Yvette abroad, penniless, language barrier, lived miserably. She wanted to return but, due to my dad's intervention, couldn't even buy a plane ticket. She called me countless times, sent countless messages begging for rescue. I didn't reply to any. As for the sold child, Mark also found clues. That underground organization planned to sell him to a wealthy merchant in Southeast Asia for some unsavory purposes. The transaction location was in 3 days, on a cruise ship in international waters. Mark asked me, Miss, should we? I shook my head. Report to the police. But. Mark hesitated, this way, the Lynn family. I don't care. I interrupted him, even princes are subject to the same laws as commoners. Yvette broke the law and should face legal sanctions. As for that child, I paused, he's innocent, but I don't owe him anything. What I can do is let him return to a normal world, not be treated as merchandise, sold back and forth. Mark looked at me and nodded. I understand. 3 days later, Interpol, in conjunction with police from multiple countries, conducted a joint arrest operation in international waters. That underground human trafficking organization was wiped out. All trafficked children were successfully rescued. Yvette's child was among them. Since biological parents couldn't be found, he was sent to a local orphanage. And Yvette, suspected of child trafficking, was wanted globally by Interpol. Awaiting her was severe legal punishment. All matters settled. Sean, upon learning the child was recovered and Yvette wanted, passed away the next day. When he died, only his pitiful old mother was by his side. My mom lay in the hospital for 2 months before discharge. After discharge, she seemed 10 years older, hair all white, spirit dazed. She no longer argued or made noise, just sat alone by the window all day, staring blankly. I visited her once. She held my hand, repeatedly saying one sentence. Lynn, Mom was wrong. Mom is sorry. Looking at her, my heart was mixed with emotions. I didn't say I forgave, nor that I didn't. Some hurts, once inflicted, can never be mended. I just instructed the nanny to take good care of her, then left. I never went back to the Lin family old house. My dad seemed to have come to terms with a lot. He handed most company affairs to me, while he became obsessed with travel and photography, roaming the world. Occasionally, he sent me landscape photos he took, with his vigorous handwriting on the back. "Lin, Dad is proud of you." I carefully collected those photos. As for me, I was still the busy President Lin. Every day, endless meetings, endless documents to sign, endless affairs to handle. But I no longer felt tired. Because I knew everything I did was for myself. To guard the empire I built with my own hands. On weekends, I occasionally went to the orphanage to see that child. He looked very much like Sean, but between his brows, there was a bit of Yvette's shadow. He was healthy and lively, the orphanage aunts all liked him. I didn't tell him who I was. I just sponsored all his living and education expenses as an anonymous donor. I hoped he could grow up healthy and happy in an environment without hatred or disputes. As for his future life, where it would go, that would be his own choice.